In 1994, Sega fans got a huge win with their very own Contra game for the Sega Genesis. It combined everything that was great about the franchise with the unique sights and sounds that only the Genesis could give us. If you've been gaming long enough, you can remember the roots of the Contra series quite well. From the arcade to the NES, Game Boy, and Super Nintendo, the quality was always top tier and one of the better representations of the shoot-'em-up genre. In other words, you could almost always count on Contra delivering an experience worth every penny of its asking price. When polygon gaming went mainstream during the rise of the PlayStation and Saturn, Konami announced a new entry into the series called Legacy of War. Unlike their 32-bit Castlevania project, however, Konami outsourced this new Contra to Appaloosa Interactive, a company that had previously done the Echo the Dolphin games for the Genesis and Saturn projects like Sky Target and Three Dirty Dwarves. The move to 3D polygon engines had been tough for many classically 2D games, and the big question was, just how did Contra itself fare in this transition? In this episode, we are going to take a look at Contra Legacy of War for the Sega Saturn, see how it turned out, and if it lived up to the stellar reputation of the series. Unlike previous entries, Legacy of War switches the run-and-gun action to an overhead top-down perspective. While a few games in the series had stages that use this viewpoint, Legacy of War opts to make it the entire game. There are no side-scrolling stages here at all. That left an interesting problem for the developers. Just how do you move and shoot at the same time without a dual analog solution? Essentially, Appaloosa went with the easiest method they could think of. L and R shoulder buttons that had an on-off effect for strafing and for firing in any direction around you. It was a functional yet inelegant setup that would make this somewhat of a chore to play from the moment you take control. You also needed to master the prone or lie down button in your moveset. This allowed you to duck under certain types of enemy attacks. You have a desperation bomb that damages everything on the screen, and you have access to additional weapons that you procure in the field. These weapons depend on your character choice and can be everything from the base machine gun to homing lasers, rockets, and flamethrowers. There are of course boss encounters at the end of each of its 6 stages, and the 2-player co-op makes a triumphant return. The overhead perspective ties your hands in many instances, often only allowing you to see small portions of the playfield. Enemies hide just off the screen for unfair damage, and sometimes there are areas that limit your movement so much taking damage is almost mandatory without repeated play sessions to learn the patterns. The story here is directly connected to the previous games and has a ruthless dictator using an alien army to conquer the Earth. Your job is to eradicate his minions and rid the planet of the alien threat once and for all. The 16-bit Contra titles had been excellent-looking games. The backgrounds were loaded with detail, the special effects were killer, and the bigger enemies were always impressively intimidating. Unfortunately, Legacy of War fails on every level visually. Despite being an excellent port of the PlayStation original, there just wasn't much here to be impressed with. Everything is drab in color, texture details are poor even for early 3D polygons, and the perspective obscures pretty much everything around you except for the ground and a few minor set pieces here and there. The stages weren't the only thing to be a big letdown, as the enemies suffer much the same. None of them stand out, and the detail is disappointing to say the least. With the presentation failing to impress, you'd think the one area the developers would have focused some visual pizzazz on would have been the boss fights, but even those are underwhelming. Some of them are large, but the design and details just look so plain and uninteresting. The final few areas do introduce a few cool effects, but it's so little, so late, you just won't care. Worse, the final planetary area literally runs at 10 frames per second, making the Mario Galaxy-like boss encounter pure torture. Bottom line, Legacy of War is an unattractive game that was unimpressive even for its day. To have gone from the beautiful 2D games before it to this was just plain depressing. Surprisingly, the sound and music do not suffer nearly as much as the visuals. In fact, some of the stuff here is actually pretty good. There are some great beats during the battle, and it gets faster and more aggressive the longer it plays. I do recommend you adjust the volume sliders in the options for maximum effect. The background music is a little low by default. It's a shame the music is attached to such a dull graphics engine, but at least your ears won't suffer the same fate as your eyes. Here are a few choice cuts. Oh man, where to begin with my critiques of this game? Right off the bat, it's loaded with cheapness. Enemies shoot you off the screen and damage can come from areas that you never see. The top-down perspective also makes it difficult to tell what you can and can't jump over, and what you can and can't duck under. This makes much of the gameplay trial and error based on a level that really impacts the fun factor. You expect to have to replay a game to learn its in and outs, but having to restart an area from the beginning while doing it just isn't fun. Later stages are so hard and fraught with death that slogging through the ugly visuals and cheap gameplay is pretty much unbearable. And nothing really improves as you move through its 6 stages. The graphics never get better, the enemies and boss fights are so vanilla it hurts, and it just falls well below the established quality the series was known for. You can't even beat the game on easy, as it ends in a message that says play on a harder difficulty. In short, it just isn't fun and has nothing really going for it that makes you want to keep the pain up to see the end. It really is amazing that the series could go from such incredible highs as Alien Wars and Hardcore to this game in just a single generational cycle. There are a few things that keep this one from being a complete waste of space, however. The 2-player co-op can be fun if both parties have some decent skill at running guns. Konami also packaged Legacy of War with the old school anaglyph 3D glasses, so you can play it in 3D. And surprise, it works pretty good. Just turn on the 3D mode in the options, adjust your TV a bit and enjoy. It was a gimmick to be sure, but seeing how the game itself was so powerfully average, anything that could help justify its existence was worth its weight in gold. I really do wish I had more positive things to say about Contra Legacy of War, but unfortunately this was a letdown no matter which way you slice it. I suppose some of you that really love the run and gun genre can get some fun out of this, but next to the better games this franchise produced in the years prior, this is at best shockingly average. And I didn't play Contra games to get an average experience, I played them because they were the best. I think the move to a 3D polygonal engine was only part of the problem though. Konami never should have farmed this out to another team. Games like Metal Gear Solid and Castlevania Symphony of the Night showed that internally, Konami could still make some winners, and Contra should have been part of those success stories. To show you the lack of faith Konami had in this mess, the Saturn version was only released in North America, and the far more popular PlayStation edition never found its way to Japan. I honestly believe this game wasn't originally a Contra release at all. Konami had gotten an outside studio to do a new 3D game for them, and after it was clear the quality was suspect, they slapped the Contra name on it, tweaked a few visual and story elements to bring it in line with the series, and boom, Legacy of War was born. The transition to 3D was so clumsy and unimpressive, I just refused to believe this was the intended route of the Contra series by design. Bringing 2D gameplay into a 3D world couldn't have been an easy transition back then, but having the Contra name attached to this brought with it a load of sky-high expectations, nearly all of which fell flat on its face. It's easily one of my most disappointing games of that era, and it's pretty easy to see why Konami never has reissued this in the years since. If you want to own this dud today, go after the PlayStation version since it's much cheaper and easier to find. Otherwise, emulation will do this misfire just fine. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.